Parents left her 10 million. They said I deserved nothing, but life proved them so wrong. The mahogany grandfather clock in the Whitmore family's Connecticut estate struck 3 in the afternoon, its chimes echoing through the marble-floored foyer. Emma Whitmore sat rigidly in the leather chair of her father's study, her hands folded tightly in her lap as the family attorney, Mr. Harrison, shuffled through the papers of her father's will. The scent of old books and expensive cigars still lingered in the air, remnants of Richard Whitmore's presence even 2 weeks after his funeral. Emma's mother, Victoria, sat across from her with that familiar expression of cold disapproval etched into her aristocratic features. Beside her, Emma's younger sister Sarah fidgeted with her designer handbag, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against the gold clasp. The tension in the room was suffocating, but Emma had learned long ago to mask her emotions behind a composed facade. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat and began reading the terms that would shatter Emma's world. Richard Whitmore, patriarch of a real estate empire worth over $50 million, had made his final judgment clear. To his beloved wife Victoria, he left the family estate and $5 million. To his cherished daughter Sarah, who had followed the family path of charity galas and social climbing, he bequeathed $10 million and control of the family foundation. And to Emma, nothing. Not a single dollar, not a family heirloom, not even acknowledgement of her existence as his daughter. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma felt the blood drain from her face as the reality sank in. 28 years of being. The family disappointment had led to this moment complete and utter rejection, even in death. Her father's voice seemed to echo from beyond the grave, repeating the words he'd spoken to her 3 years earlier when she'd chosen to become a social worker, instead of joining the family business. You've made your choice, Emma. Don't expect you is to support your naive idealism. Victoria's lips curved into the slightest smile, an expression Emma knew well from childhood, the look of someone who had finally gotten exactly what they wanted. Sarah, to her credit, appeared genuinely shocked, her blue eyes wide with disbelief. But shock wasn't enough to make her refuse the inheritance. It never was with Sarah. As Mr. Harrison concluded the reading and gathered his documents, Emma stood on unsteady legs. The room seemed to spin slightly, the weight of betrayal and abandonment crushing down on her shoulders. She had known her relationship with her parents was strained, but this final act of cruelty exceeded even her lowest expectations. Without a word, Emma walked toward the door of the study, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors that had once felt like home. Behind her, she could hear her mother's voice, cold and satisfied, discussing trust fund details with the attorney. No one called after her. No one attempted to explain or apologize. The message was crystal clear. Emma Whitmore was no longer part of this family. Standing in the circular driveway of the estate, Emma looked back at the imposing colonial mansion where she'd grown up. The perfectly manicured gardens, the fountain imported from Italy, the windows that gleamed in the afternoon sun, it all belonged to someone else now. She pulled out her phone and called a taxi, refusing to ask her family for even the courtesy of a ride. As she waited, Emma made a promise to herself. She would prove them wrong. She would build a life so meaningful, so successful in its own right, that their money would seem insignificant by comparison. The girl who had once desperately sought her parents' approval was gone, replaced by a woman who would forge her own path. The taxi arrived, and Emma slid into the worn vinyl seat without looking back. She gave the driver the address of her modest apartment in Hartford, a one-bedroom place that cost her half her social worker's salary. It wasn't much, but it was hers, earned through her own effort and integrity. That night, alone in her small kitchen, Emma sat at her second-hand table and made lists. Lists of her skills, her contacts, her goals. If her family wanted to erase her from their lives, she would show them what they'd lost. She would take everything they'd dismissed about her, her empathy, her determination, her ability to connect with people from all walks of life and turn it into something extraordinary. The first step was clear. She needed to find a way to multiply her impact. Working for the state social services department had taught her about the system's limitations and the desperate need for innovative solutions. Emma had always dreamed of starting her own nonprofit organization, but her modest salary had made it impossible to save enough for startup costs. Now, with nothing left to lose, Emma decided to take the biggest risk of her life. She would quit her secure job and dedicate everything to building an organization that could actually make a difference. She had $6,700 in her savings account, a battered Honda Civic, and an unshakable belief that she could help people in ways her family's charitable donations never could. Over the following weeks, Emma threw herself into research and planning. She spent her evenings in the Hartford Public Library, studying successful nonprofit models and grant writing techniques. She reached out to former colleagues, professors from her social work program, and community leaders, building a network of people who believed in her vision. Her idea was ambitious: a comprehensive support center for families in crisis that would provide not just emergency assistance, but long-term guidance and resources to help people achieve genuine stability. Unlike traditional programs that treated symptoms, Emma's organization would address root causes, combining financial counseling, job training, childcare, mental health services, and educational support under one roof. The more Emma developed her plan, the more excited she became. This wasn't just about proving her family wrong anymore. It was about creating something that could transform lives. She remembered the faces of the children she'd worked with in foster care, the single mothers struggling to make ends meet, the elderly people isolated and forgotten by society. These were the people who truly mattered, not the shallow social circles her family inhabited. As autumn turned to winter, Emma's small apartment became mission control for her ambitious project. The walls were covered with flowcharts, budget projections, and contact lists. She applied for dozens of grants, pitched her idea to potential donors, and slowly began to see interest building. A local businessman who had grown up in poverty agreed to serve on her board of directors. A retired social worker offered to volunteer her time. A small church donated meeting space for planning sessions. Emma was living on ramen noodles and determination. But for the first time in her life, she felt truly alive. Every small victory, every expression of support, every connection made was proof that she was on the right path. Her family had given her the greatest gift possible. Though they would never understand it, they had forced her to discover her own strength. 2 years after being disowned, Emma stood in the main hall of the Riverside Community Center, watching volunteers set up tables for the grand opening celebration. The space buzzed with activity as local families, community leaders, and supporters prepared for the launch of Second Chances, the nonprofit organization Emma had built from nothing. The transformation had been remarkable, but the journey had tested every ounce of Emma's resilience. Those first months after leaving her secure job had been brutal. She'd survived on freelance consulting work, eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner, and wearing the same 3 professional outfits in rotation. There were nights when she'd questioned her sanity, when the voices of doubt sounded suspiciously like her mother's disapproving tone. But Emma had persevered, fueled by the stories of the people she was determined to help. Like Maria, a single mother of 3 who had lost her job and apartment in the same week. Through Second Chance's emergency assistance program, Maria had received temporary housing, childcare during job interviews, and financial counseling that helped her secure a stable position at a local hospital. 6 months later, Maria had her own apartment and was taking evening classes to become a nurse, or like Robert, a military veteran struggling with PTSD who had been living in his car. Second Chances connected him with mental health services, helped him apply for benefits he didn't know he qualified for, and provided job training in computer repair. Robert now worked full-time at a local electronics store and was training other veterans in technical skills. These success stories had caught the attention of larger foundations and government agencies. Emma's innovative approach treating each family as a complete ecosystem rather than isolated problems was showing measurable results. Families served by Second Chances had an 87% success rate in achieving long-term stability, compared to the 34% average for traditional programs. The recognition had led to significant funding opportunities. A federal grant worth $1.2 million. A partnership with the state university to study and replicate Emma's model. Corporate sponsors who saw the value in community investment. What had started as a desperate attempt to prove her worth had evolved into a legitimate force for social change. Emma had also discovered talents she never knew she possessed. Years of navigating her family's complex social dynamics had given her unexpected skills in diplomacy and negotiation. Her ability to connect with people from different backgrounds, something her parents had dismissed as naive. Idealism made her incredibly effective at building coalitions between unlikely partners. The media attention had been overwhelming but beneficial. Local news stations featured Second Chances regularly, showcasing the families whose lives had been transformed. A national magazine had included Emma in their 30 Under 30 Social Innovators list. Speaking invitations poured in from conferences and universities across the country. As Emma walked through the celebration that evening, greeting supporters and community members, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. She now lived in a comfortable townhouse in a diverse neighborhood where kids played in the streets and neighbors knew each other's names. Her work had introduced her to people of genuine character, individuals who measured success by their impact on others rather than the zeros in their bank accounts. More importantly, Emma had found love in the most unexpected place. David Chun, a pediatric nurse who volunteered at Second Chances family events, had become first a friend, then a partner who shared her values and supported her ambitions. Their relationship was built on mutual respect and common purpose qualities that had been entirely absent from her family dynamics. But the evening's biggest surprise came in the form of an unexpected visitor. As Emma was thanking volunteers near the entrance, she spotted a familiar figure hovering uncertainly by the door. Sarah, her younger sister, stood awkwardly in the threshold, clearly out of place in her designer dress among the diverse crowd of community members. The sisters hadn't spoken since that devastating day in their father's study. Emma felt a complex mix of emotions as Sarah approached: anger, hurt, but also curious about what had brought her here. Sarah's usual confidence seemed shaken, her perfectly composed facade cracking slightly. Sarah had changed in subtle ways. The entitled superiority that had always defined her seemed dimmed, replaced by something that looked almost like humility. She explained that she had been following Emma's work through news articles and social media, watching from a distance as her sister built something meaningful from nothing. The conversation that followed was difficult and honest in ways their family had never allowed. Sarah admitted that inheriting their father's money had brought unexpected complications. The guilt of receiving everything while Emma got nothing had eaten away at her. Worse, she had discovered that wealth without purpose felt empty. The charitable foundation she now managed had shown her the difference between writing checks and actually making a difference. Sarah revealed that she had spent months trying to find ways to use her inheritance meaningfully. She had visited other nonprofits, studied effective philanthropy, and slowly realized that what Emma was doing represented everything their family's charity work had failed to achieve. The Whitmore Foundation's donations had always been about social status and tax benefits, not genuine impact. Most surprisingly, Sarah asked if she could volunteer at Second Chances, not as the wealthy benefactor swooping in to save the day, but as someone who wanted to learn how to make a real difference. She was tired of being valued only for her money and wanted to discover if she had any worth beyond her Inheritance. Emma's initial skepticism gradually gave way to cautious optimism, as she saw genuine remorse and determination in her sister's eyes. Sarah's request to start at the bottom, helping with administrative tasks and learning the organization from the ground up, seemed sincere. Perhaps people really could change, even those raised in the suffocating privilege of the Whitmore world. Evening concluded with Emma addressing the gathered crowd, thanking everyone who had supported Second Chance's mission. As she spoke about the importance of second chances for families in crisis, for communities ready to embrace change, and for people seeking redemption, Emma realized she was also talking about herself, standing at the podium, surrounded by people whose lives had been touched by her work. Emma understood that her parents' cruel rejection had actually been a liberation. Being forced to build her own life from scratch had revealed strengths she never would have discovered within the comfortable cage of inherited wealth. The woman she had become, confident, purpose-driven, genuinely respected, was someone her younger self could never have imagined. Looking out at the faces in the crowd, Emma saw Maria with her children, Robert in his Second Chances volunteer t-shirt, David beaming with pride, and even Sarah listening intently from the back. These were her real family now, people connected not by blood or money, but by shared values and mutual support. As the celebration wound down and the last guests departed, Emma stood alone in the empty community center, surrounded by the evidence of what determination and compassion could accomplish. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more families in need, and the ongoing work of expanding Second Chance's reach. But tonight, Emma allowed herself to feel the deep satisfaction of a life lived with purpose. Her parents had tried to erase her from their story, but Emma had written a better one entirely. In choosing to help others rebuild their lives, she had reconstructed her own into something far more valuable than any inheritance could ever provide. The girl who had once desperately sought approval from people who couldn't see her worth had become a woman who measured success by the lives she had touched and the hope she had restored. The greatest irony was that Emma had never been richer, not in money, but in everything that actually mattered. And that was inheritance no one could ever take away.
Thank you for watching this story unfold with us here on M&A The Story Unfolds. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new tale. We'd love to know where you're watching. Leave a comment below and tell us what part of the world you're joining us from. Your support means everything. See you in the next story.